Do you know what I do in my spare time? Recording this video, obviously. I've read an interesting article recently about leisure time activities, and I'd like to discuss that with you. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung, and I welcome you to this Soft Skill Talk, the first of its kind, a new format on this channel. Usually in my regular videos I present a specific topic, so it's rather straight to the point and quite condensed. I know my videos are rather long in comparison to other YouTube videos, but the topics are presented in a rather brief amount of time compared to, for example, workshops. And here I'd like to do things in a bit more relaxed way. Therefore I have the t-shirt instead of a dress shirt, a bit more informal. And I'd just like to talk about topics that interested me recently, that I dealt with recently, or about interesting things I discovered, such as an interesting article I read recently. It was a German article. The title was literally translated, "Too much leisure time isn't good either," and it is based on a study that is in English. It took place in the USA. It was performed by Marissa Sherriff, Cassie Mogilna, and Hal Hirschfield, and it dealt with the question, is too much spare time detrimental? Now it's quite obvious that too little spare time is a problem, because if you work a lot and you don't have enough relaxation and recreation, then there is a high risk of health problems, and you probably won't be very happy and satisfied with that situation. However, the question is it the more leisure time the better? Or is there some kind of limit where additional leisure time is actually detrimental? And that's what they tried to find out. And they actually performed 4 different studies for that. In the first 2, they had a look at existing materials, existing numbers from other studies and surveys, from the National Study of the Changing Workforce and from the American Time Use Survey, because in both those surveys, among other things, people are asked about the amount of spare time they have and about how happy and satisfied they are with their lives. And based on the numbers from those surveys, it seems that a very high amount of leisure time, such as approaching 20 hours of leisure time per day, actually leads to a lower satisfaction than a lower amount of spare time available. Now, obviously, we can only speculate about the reasons. If people have such an excessive amount of spare time available, such as 20 hours a day, this might mean they only have some part-time employment. And maybe they would actually like to work more, but they can't find a job for that, and maybe they have a severe lack of money, shortage of money, which could all contribute to them being not as happy and satisfied. So the authors of the study performed 2 surveys themselves to further investigate the question. And in their first study, they wanted to find out if people with a medium amount of spare time are actually happier than people with a lot of spare time. They compared having 15 minutes per day, having 3.5 hours per day, and having 7 hours of leisure time per day in that study. And in their second study, they wanted to find out if the activities you actually perform in your spare time, if they influence the amount of happiness and satisfaction. So if it makes a difference whether you perform activities that are regarded as more good and useful, such as social activities, exercise, sports, things like that, compared to activities that are considered not as good and useful, such as watching TV. Now, what I found a bit problematic is the way they distinguished between different kinds of activities. For example, between activities that are leisure time activities and activities that are not, and between, let's say, activities that are social activities and non-social activities, productive activities, non-productive activities, all of those things, because there are obviously lots of individual differences. A lot of people would probably say cooking is not a leisure time activity. Cooking is work, and cooking is unpleasant, and I don't enjoy it. I just have to do it. While a lot of other people would say cooking is a beloved hobby for me, and I really enjoy it, and it is certainly a leisure time activity. And some people might always cook with friends or with their partner, so it is a social activity for them, while a lot of other people probably cook all alone, and so on. And the way they distinguished between such things is they distinguished by majority. Though they asked all of their participants, do you think, for example, cooking is a social activity or non-social activity? And based on the majority, they decided. So the individual differences between participants were not taken into account. There is another more severe problem, because what they actually did is they didn't give the participants a chance to actually try out the situation they wanted to investigate. So, for example, they didn't give the participants that were used to investigate the 7 hours of spare time per day scenarios actually, that they didn't actually give those participants those 7 hours and had them observe what they did and how they felt and so on over some time, but they just asked them to imagine that situation, to imagine having 7 hours of spare time per day for a prolonged period, more than 6 months, and to tell them what they would do with that time, how they would feel, how content they would be, how satisfied with their lives. And to me, this To me, this isn't conclusive in any way. This doesn't really tell you anything, because your imagination and your plans and the way you think things will turn out is not a good indicator of how things will actually turn out. For example, all of you have probably experienced plenty of times that you've made certain plans for your leisure time, that you imagine you would do certain things, but in the end it turned out all different because things changed, maybe you were not in the mood, you preferred something different. So your plans are not a good indicator of what your leisure time will be like. And it gets even more vague for your happiness and satisfaction. Probably all of you have experienced situations where beforehand you thought, oh, if I achieve this or do that or buy this, then I will be so happy. And in the end, you were not, unfortunately. And the other way around, you have probably experienced situations where beforehand you thought, oh, this will be boring and unpleasant and I won't enjoy it at all. But in the end, it turned out to be absolutely great and you enjoyed it a lot. So, predicting your satisfaction and your happiness is quite difficult, and even more so for situations that are just imaginative themselves. So I don't find this conclusive and meaningful in any way, and I wouldn't trust a result that is obtained in such a way. It would be much too vague for me. There was a statement I actually wanted to talk about in this video, because in that article I read at first, they stated that according to the study, people who had 3.5 hours of leisure time per day, they would perform activities that are good and productive and so on, like social activities, exercise, active activities. But if they had 7 hours, they would use the additional time for unproductive activities such as watching TV, and this would be the cause of people being not as satisfied with their leisure time. And I found this strange because it contradicts my personal experience. My personal experience is that the first things I do in my spare time are those that I enjoy the most, no matter if they are productive or not. And if I have additional spare time, then I start saying, oh well, I could go for a run, I could do some exercise because I have the time and it's good for me. So I found this strange. Now the problem is, I read the original study and I didn't find this statement anywhere in the original study. The authors of the original study never claimed something like that, as far as I can tell. Now it might be my mistake, I don't want to blame the author of that article, but I couldn't find this statement anywhere in the original source. So when I started this, I thought we would have a look at an interesting article about leisure time and we would learn something interesting about leisure time activities. Now, in the end, I think we have learned something about articles and studies. Namely, if you read an interesting headline, such as too much leisure time is actually bad for you or something like that, we shouldn't just say, oh, interesting, I've learned something new, I will remember that. But we should have a closer look, and we should have a look at the original study if it is available, and we should check out how did they come to that conclusion, what did they do to investigate this matter, and is this something I find trustworthy and conclusive, and will I trust the result if it was obtained in such a way. And does this article really represent the original study? Does it portray the same understanding of the original study that I have? And I think this is the important thing we can learn from that. I hope you enjoyed this little soft skill talk. Please let me know in the comments how you liked it, and maybe if there are topics that you would like to see in a future talk. Maybe you've read an interesting article, stumbled upon an interesting study that would make a great soft skill talk. So please let me know in the comments. I'm looking forward to your feedback. We will see each other again next week when we discuss other interesting topics. For today, I'll take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.